Welcome to SecOps, the podcast created by Ben, Moise, and Sneh, and powered by Cyber Viewpoint.
Welcome back to our cybersecurity series. Today we're diving into security assessment and testing, basically the processes that keep systems strong, compliant, and hopefully ready to defend against, all those ever-evolving threats. Okay, maybe let's kick things off with a scene setter. Just imagine this for a second. You're securing a massive new data center, millions invested, next-gen firewalls, zero trust, the works. You run this really comprehensive digital pen test, everything looks solid.
Right, sounds like a good start.
But the breach, it doesn't start online at all. It starts because some attacker finds crucial configuration details. Well, literally in the trash, dumpster diving.
Oh, wow, the low-tech classic.
Exactly, or maybe they just walked in right behind an employee holding the door open, tailgate.
What happens all the time? It's just a sobering reminder, isn't it, that sophisticated digital defense is only one piece of the puzzle. Security programs often fail not because the fancy tech didn't work, but because, well, the basic processes, or maybe the human elements, were never properly tested. So the big question for us today, I think, is why does even the most sophisticated security still need this rigorous, consistent testing and, across all layers, technical, physical, human?
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is understanding that assessment, testing, auditing, it's not just about finding flaws.
Right.
It's a continuous effort. You need it to truly validate the organization's security posture.
Validate.
We've got to move beyond just like installing controls. We need to make sure every single one technical, administrative, physical is actually effective in practice. This constant validation, that's how we demonstrate due diligence.
That phrase, demonstrating due diligence, that feels really key. So if we're building out a comprehensive testing strategy, first step seems to be deciding who actually does the testing. Our sources mentioned 4 different parties.
That's right. And the choice often comes down to independence and maybe specialized skill. First, you've got your internal staff.
Right, the home team.
They have deep knowledge of the systems, sure, but objectivity can be a struggle. It's just hard to find flaws in something you helped build,
Yeah, I get that.
So then you might use external organizations like consultants. They bring fresh eyes, that crucial independence, and often very specialized expertise that you might not have in-house.
Okay, makes sense. And the third and fourth parties, those sound like they touch on supply chain security, which is obviously huge right now.
Exactly. Third parties are absolutely vital when you're auditing outsourced service providers. If you rely on a cloud vendor or, say, a SaaS platform, you need assurance they are secure.
You need their reports, their attestations.
Precisely. And finally, sometimes the customer themselves might perform direct assessments, though more commonly they rely on those external audits, those third-party reports, to manage their vendor risk.
So that split, it's really about minimizing internal bias and just maximizing the quality of the findings.
Absolutely. It's about getting the most reliable picture.
Okay, so with those boundaries sort of set, let's drill down into the 2 maybe most common types of testing. People throw around vulnerability assessment and penetration testing almost interchangeably, but strategically they're quite different, aren't they? What's the critical distinction?
It really comes down to intent.
Yeah.
A vulnerability assessment, or VA, is essentially passive identification of weaknesses.
Passive, okay.
You're running automated scans, mostly, to find known issues, missing patches, common misconfigurations, but you're not actively trying to exploit them. It gives you a comprehensive list, like an inventory of potential flaws.
Like checking all the doors and windows to see if they're unlocked.
Exactly. Whereas penetration testing, or PT, that's an active exploitation simulation.
Yeah.
The testers deliberately try to move past just identifying a vulnerability.
They try to open the unlocked window.
Right. They try to prove if it's truly exploitable, how far they can get inside, and what business impact that exploit could actually create. So a VA gives you a list of every, let's say, broken lock on the building. A PT shows you which specific broken lock an attacker can actually use to, steal the car parked inside.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's get into the technical side, the tools. For technical scanning, we often rely on network-based scanners, things like Nessus or Qualys. They look at the OS, the infrastructure.
Yeah, they're great for that infrastructure hygiene.
Okay.
Is the OS patched? Are the network protocols secure? That sort of thing.
But then you have application scanning tools like HCL App Scan or Burp Suite. They're looking for completely different kinds of problems, right?
Totally different. Application scanners focus on the code itself. They're hunting for defects like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, maybe insecure logic in how data is handled within the application.
And within both network and application scanning, there's this strategic choice. Unauthenticated versus authenticated scans. Why do we need both? Why not just run one?
Good question. An unauthenticated scan is essential because it mimics what an external attacker sees, someone with zero credentials. It's your classic perimeter breach view.
Okay, the outside-in look.
Exactly. But that's only half the picture. You absolutely must run authenticated scans too, by giving the scanner valid login credentials.
Ah, so it logs in like a user.
Precisely. It gets an insider's perspective. It can then check for deep-seated misconfigurations or maybe missing patches that are only visible after logging in. This is crucial for modeling internal threats and also for compliance validation. You need to know what a malicious insider or just compromised credentials could expose.
I see. Okay, so if network scans find holes in the wall, application testing often requires us to shift left, as they say, and look at the actual source code much earlier. That's where SAST and DOST come in.
Right. Static and dynamic application security testing.
So SAST, static analysis, looks at the code before it runs. It seems like the ultimate preventative fix, right? So why do organizations still spend so much time and money on DAST, dynamic analysis, which tests the running application?
That's a critical point. SAST is fantastic, don't get me wrong. It's great for catching those classic coding errors like buffer overflows or injection flaws really early in the development cycle. It truly is a key part of shifting left.
The hero, as you said.
Kind of, yeah. But DAST is still necessary because it executes the application. It looks for runtime issues, flaws that might only appear when different components interact, or maybe when the app is deployed in the specific environment.
Ah, things SAST can't see just by looking at the code.
Exactly. DAST often uses techniques like fuzzing, throwing unexpected data at the application to intentionally cause malfunctions and uncover vulnerabilities. SAST might miss a subtle configuration flaw on the web server itself, for example, that DAST could find when testing the live running application. Using both gives you much more complete coverage.
Okay, that makes sense. You need both static checks and runtime checks. Now, this brings us back to that opening scenario, the low-tech, high-impact failure. We've talked technical exploitation, but sophisticated attacks mean nothing if the human perimeter is easily breached. What about the non-digital side of testing?
Yeah, that's where physical pen testing comes into play. It's all about simulating a physical intrusion. And often, it uses incredibly simple tactics.
Like we mentioned earlier.
Exactly, tailgating, where an attacker just follows an authorized person into a supposedly secure area. Or the classic dumpster diving for finding sensitive information carelessly thrown away.
It really highlights that access cards and security cameras aren't enough if the staff culture isn't security aware, right?
Absolutely. If people are too complacent or too helpful, those technical controls become kind of meaningless.
And for the testers doing this, there's real risk, isn't there? Confrontation, maybe even legal issues?
Definitely. That's why carrying a get-out-of-jail-free letter is so important.
The authorization letter.
Yes, signed by high-level management, clearly stating that their activities are authorized. It's a necessary legal safeguard. It proves the simulation is sanctioned and protects the tester from potential liability if they get caught, picking a lock or wandering somewhere they shouldn't be.
That detail really underscores the seriousness of these simulations. Okay, and then there's social engineering pen testing. This feels like pure behavioral science.
It really is. This tests the resilience of your personnel. It uses tactics like targeted spam and phishing messages.
The kind everyone gets.
Exactly. But maybe more sophisticated ones tailored to the organization to see how many employees click malicious links, download attachments, or even give away their credentials.
It's probably the most direct way to measure if security awareness training is actually working, isn't it? Or if it's just, box ticking.
It's a very effective metric for exactly that. It shows you the real-world effectiveness of your human firewall.
Okay, so we've covered the main types of tests. Now, let's shift gears slightly and talk about assessing the foundational processes that enable long-term security hygiene. That has to start with continuous monitoring and logging, right?
Absolutely. And when we talk about logging, it's not just about flicking a switch to turn it on. It's about strategically capturing the right events from every critical control point in your environment.
So what needs to be logged?
Well, you need logs from pretty much every device that enforces a security policy. The perimeter devices like firewalls, web application firewalls, WAFs.
Okay.
Intrusion detection and prevention systems, IDSSS, data loss prevention, DLP tools. cloud access security brokers, CASBs, even things like secrets vaults where credentials or keys are stored.
That's a lot of logs.
It is. And crucially, that logging strategy often has to adhere to specific regulatory or legal mandates. Compliance often dictates what you log and for how long. But just logging isn't enough.
Right. Someone has to look at them.
Exactly. The security control test itself is the formal periodic log review. You simply can't detect a sophisticated attack with a long dwell time, months, maybe, if no one is actually analyzing those records regularly.
Makes sense. Speaking of rigor, you mentioned SAST and DOST for code, but there are more formal methods too, right? Like code review.
Yes, code review, often called peer review, is essential. Developers examine each other's code changes to find not just functional bugs, but also specific security flaws, things like potential buffer overflows or race conditions that automated tools might miss.
But the source material also introduced something even more structured. Formal inspections. What are those about?
Formal inspections, sometimes referred to as Fagan inspections after Michael Fagan, who developed the method, are about pushing defect discovery even earlier in the lifecycle.
Even earlier than code review.
Yes. They are highly structured processes used to find defects in design documents, requirements, specifications, even test plans, not just the source code itself. This is the ultimate shift-left philosophy, aiming to prevent security flaws from even being designed or coded in the first place.
Wow, okay. That's truly proactive. And related to testing the code's logic, we need to go beyond the happy path, right? We need misuse case testing.
That's critical. Standard use case testing checks if the system works as intended when used correctly. Misuse case testing does the opposite.
Trying to break it.
Intentionally, yes. It simulates unintended or malicious actions like, say, typing weird binary code into a field expecting only numbers, or trying to access functions you shouldn't be able to. It's designed to uncover vulnerabilities that normal functional testing would completely overlook.
And this also connects to interface testing.
It does. Misuse case testing often involves probing the interfaces between different components, especially application programming interfaces or APIs. Interface testing specifically focuses on verifying the data transfer and the control flow between these components, looking for weaknesses in how they communicate.
Okay. Now, before we get into formal audits and compliance, let's briefly touch on automation. Breach and attack simulations, BAS platforms, seem increasingly popular. How do they fit in? Are they like automated pen tests?
They're sort of a middle ground, maybe a step up in some ways. BAS is typically an automated continuous process. It's designed not just to test your defenses like your EDR or firewall rules, but crucially to simultaneously test your incident response capabilities.
So it tests detection and response.
Exactly. It runs simulated attacks constantly and provides ongoing, repeatable metrics on how well your security tools and your response team perform against common, known attack vectors. It's less about finding 0 days and more about validating your existing controls and processes are working as expected, day in, day out.
Interesting. Okay, shifting now towards governance. What happens when testing isn't just about finding risk, but it's driven primarily by compliance requirements?
Yeah, that changes the game slightly. Compliance frameworks like PCI DSS for payment card data or TaiPay for healthcare information.
Right, the big ones.
They often mandate specific security controls and testing procedures, regardless of what a company's own internal risk assessment might say. These become non-negotiable requirements.
So you have to do that.
You have to do them, and you have to prove you're doing them. This is where a formal security audit comes in. It's typically a formal examination, often by an independent third party, sometimes internal audit, to ensure systems and business processes not only meet these strict compliance mandates, but are also designed properly, used correctly, and are genuinely effective.
So when these auditors come in, how do they actually verify things? They can't just trust the documentation, right?
No, definitely not. Auditors use several core techniques to gather evidence. Inspection is one, just examining policy documents, configuration files, log records, things like that.
Looking at the paper trail.
Right. But more importantly, there's reperformance. This is where the auditor independently performs the control action themselves to verify it works exactly as described in the documentation.
So they might try to access something they shouldn't to test access controls?
Precisely. Or they might rerun a backup procedure. They might also use something called control self-assessment, CSA, where the actual owners of the controls perform predefined tests and the auditor reviews their results and methodology.
Okay. And they can't test everything, can they? There's too much data.
No. Absolutely not. For efficiency, auditors rely heavily on sampling techniques. They test a representative subset of a population, say a sample of user accounts, or a sample of firewall rule changes to draw conclusions about the whole system. Attribute sampling, for instance, checks if a specific characteristic, like proper approval for access, is present or absent in the sample.
Got it. And these audits often look at ongoing processes too.
Yes, process reviews are key governance controls. Things like account access reviews are critical. These are periodic checks, maybe quarterly or annually, to ensure that users, especially those with privileged access, still actually need that access for their job roles.
And to clean up unused accounts.
Exactly. Deactivate dormant accounts, remove permissions that are no longer required. Equally vital is formal management review and approval. Senior management must review key aspects of the security program metrics, audit results, major risks, with the same seriousness and rigor they apply to, say, financial reporting or operational performance. Security can't be an afterthought.
That brings us perfectly to the final pieces, metrics and reporting. Closing the loop on this whole assessment process. Now, we know measuring security effectiveness is notoriously difficult. There's no single magic number, right?
No, unfortunately not. It's a complex area.
So what are the most useful measurements, things management can actually understand and act on?
We tend to rely on key performance indicators, KPIs, and key risk indicators, KRIs. For measuring the success of your detection and response program, arguably the single most valuable metric is dwell time.
How long an attacker goes undetected.
Exactly. How long is an adversary inside your network before you spot them and kick them out? You need to measure that aggressively and constantly try to reduce it. For other areas, like, say, security awareness training, metrics on relevance, completion rates, and maybe scores on phishing simulations are necessary to prove the training is actually having an impact, not just being passively consumed to pick a compliance box.
Okay, so you measure what matters for specific goals. Now, once all this testing, the VAs, the pen tests, the audits is done, and you have the findings report, what happens next? What are the essential steps stakeholders need to take?
There's a critical 4-step process, and it needs discipline. First, you validate the findings. Especially with external reports, don't just blindly accept everything. Do a sanity check. Does this make sense in our environment? Are there false positives?
Okay, validate first.
Second, you prioritize. You likely can't fix everything at once. Prioritize based on the actual risk level, maybe the ease of fixing the quick wins, or perhaps the visibility or compliance impact of the finding.
Makes sense. Triage the issues.
Third, obviously remediate. You need a plan to actually fix the prioritized findings. Assign owners. Track progress. And fourth, and this is crucial, particularly for the testers themselves, is handling ethical disclosure.
What does that involve?
Assessors have a really serious, sometimes high-stakes responsibility here. If, during their authorized testing, they uncover evidence of actual ongoing criminality, not just a vulnerability, maybe active fraud or illegal activity.
Oh, wow.
They have to carefully balance their contractual obligation of confidentiality to the client with potential legal or ethical obligations to notify law enforcement or regulatory bodies. It's a very tricky area.
Yeah, that sounds like a tightrope walk. Balancing protection and legal adherence, that's a really critical final step in the whole assessment lifecycle. Okay, let's move to the actionable takeaway. For anyone involved in developing systems, the big message seems to be ruthlessly enforce that shift left approach. Really focus on integrating proactive testing mechanisms early on.
Absolutely.
Use SAST, the static code analysis, and maybe those formal inspections right in the design and coding phases. Don't just wait for the end-of-cycle pen test to find everything.
Because the cost skyrockets later, right?
Exactly. The cost of fixing a vulnerability after launch, or worse, after a breach, is exponentially higher than preventing it or catching it early in the design phase. It's about moving those security dollars from purely reactive testing to more proactive quality assurance baked into development.
That's a fantastic point. And building on that, my final thought is this. We spend enormous resources identifying risks and vulnerabilities through all this testing we've discussed. But what happens once a risk is identified, assessed, and maybe ultimately deemed acceptable by the business?
Right, the risk acceptance process.
We need to remember that risk acceptance should never, ever be indefinite. It shouldn't be a set it and forget it decision. That acceptance should always be for a limited, defined period, maybe 1 year, maybe tied to the next major release cycle.
So it needs reevaluation.
It requires mandatory reassessment. Why? Because the landscape changes constantly. Last year's acceptable risk might not be acceptable this year because of new threats, changes in technology, new regulations, or even changes in your own business context. So the question I'd leave you with is, What strategic resources will you dedicate to ensuring your accepted risks are rigorously reviewed before they potentially become a massive, unexpected liability down the road?
That's a powerful question. Security assessment isn't a one-time event or a destination. It really is a relentless, continuous journey that has to cover the code, the network, the infrastructure, and, crucially, the people. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into security assessment and testing. Be sure to subscribe and follow our series as we continue to unpack the core of modern cybersecurity practices.